This is Mile High Sports.
We found out who the Denver Broncos team captains are today, and no surprises, at least in my opinion. Russell Wilson, Justin Simmons, Bradley Chubb, Cortland Sutton, and Brandon McManus. Anything stand out to you about that bunch?
No, as expected, those are the guys. I think, for Bradley Chubb, first time ever being elected as a captain in his NFL career. But I've seen him do a lot of great things as a leader. I've seen his leadership traits on display. He's more of a lead by example type of guy. But yeah, I think that these are good choices for this team, and you can make the argument about some other players. And even Coach Hackett said it was a tough decision. Players voted on the captains themselves. Last year with Vic Fangio, the last 2 years, they would just be random game day captains. There was no set in stone captains.
That sounds so Fangio.
It was definitely it is a Fangio move, but as we know, this is a player-led team. As Nathaniel Hackett has said, as players have said, this is a player-led team, and Nathaniel Hackett empowers them to do that. And I think they got it right with the choices. I mean, you can make the arguments for guys like Lloyd Cushenberry, got some love from Bradley Chubb, Patrick Surtain. You can maybe mention him. Dalton Reisner's a guy on the O-line. Garrett Bowles potentially. Draymond Jones, Deshaun Williams. I mean, you can make an argument for many, many players to, have a stake at being a captain. But it wasn't just, these five had the most votes altogether, but there were other players that got votes. So I think that's also a really good sign to have inside the locker room. I definitely think looking back on it, you could probably go back to last year's team. Who were the true captains? Justin Simmons. I would have argued Kareem Jackson.
Oh, yeah, Von Miller to enter the year.
Vaughn entering the year. Offensively, though, I would have went with Cortland. Last year, I totally would have went with him. Outside of that, who else would we? I know Teddy got the nod, but I honestly wouldn't have went with him.
Tim Patrick.
Yeah,
just as a guy who's been there.
Yeah, Tim Patrick I think was more of a lead by example type guy too.
It's interesting. I think Justin Simmons is always kind of not anointed himself, but everyone knows that he is a captain, right? He's got those leadership abilities, and I think everybody has always looked at him as a captain as he's kind of asserted himself here. We actually got that soundbite from Nathaniel Hackett talking about the voting process and kind of how they came up with their team captains. So why don't you hear it from yourself? Here's Coach Hackett today at practice talking about the committee.
We had everybody vote. I think the best testament was how many guys we got votes. It wasn't just those five. It was numerous guys. On the offensive line, we had a bunch of guys. And I think it's just great to see there's so many people that believe in their teammates. It wasn't just such a very specific amount of guys. So I think that's what's great to see.
The Chubb one, not surprising, but I guess if I had to pick one guy that's surprising to be a captain, it would probably be him. Not that it's shocking, but you bring up Garrett Bowles. He's a guy who I feel like has been through some ups and downs in his careers and could be a good team captain. Just kind of knowing some of the adversity he's had to face. I think Pat Surtain, when it's all said and done, will be a captain probably next year. I think it's just a matter of we don't want to make a second-year player a captain right now. Let me ask, does it matter how long the player's been in the league?
No.
Would you have made Pat Surtain? Would you have been okay making Pat Surtain a captain this year?
Yeah, easily, by far. I mean, watching how he goes about his day, how humble he is, but also just doing everything right. He's not going to be the loud, vocal guy. He never says a word. You never see him talking trash. You always just see him locked in and laser focused, leading by example. I would have had no problem at all with Surtain being a captain.
You mentioned how, under Vic Fangio is a little bit of captain by committee. Does it matter on a week-to-week basis whether it's captain by committee or maybe electing captains before the start of the season? Does that make a difference on the football field or in the locker room?
I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I think the bigger question here is how does it change, right? I think that when you look in a locker room, you know the guys that are going to that are going to speak. You know the guys that when they speak, they hold the room. And I think Russell Wilson's a prime example. When he speaks, everybody listens. Everybody is locked into what he's saying. You look at guys like Justin Simmons, when he speaks to the defense, everybody listens. Everybody locks in. You look at Bradley Chubb, a lead by example guy. Brandon McManus, not a guy that's going to say much, but is going to lead by example. And then you go through and you look at Cortland Sutton. Once again, another guy who's going to lead by example. Doesn't need to be rah-rah. And I think a lot of people confuse if you're a team captain, you need to be this vocal, rah-rah type of guy. You don't have to be. It's just about doing the things that are, right on the field and off the field and showing people how to do things the right way, in the process, whether it be with the playbook. And for me, what Cortland said today about him, he's just the lead by example type. But he's also the guy that wants to take young guys under his wing, mentor them, and show them, how to do something if they do something wrong, instead of coming down on them. And I kind of got the hunch that there was a lot of the coming down stuff from, I think, some of the coaches last year on a player. And this is where, I think this is where the players really rallied together last year despite Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur kind of losing the locker room in a sense from their roles. I think it's huge. But for Cortland, I remember it clear as day when he was a rookie. I was at training camp. I watched him. There was a player that every time they'd come through a drill or they'd go through and someone's turn would come up, Demaryius Thomas would go up to these players and he'd show them hey, maybe you'd want to do things this way, or, if you're going to approach it this way, here's how, you attack it with your stance or your footwork or stuff like that. And that's what Cortland Sutton has kind of embraced. So he learned that a little bit from DT. He's also had, great experience through high school and through college, and his experience even attested to that. But I think he's carrying over a little bit of what DT has shown him, and he's doing that with a lot of these young guys. He's really become the alpha in that wide receiver room.
Yeah, and I think that's going to pay dividends as well. And I mean, if you're learning from Demaryius Thomas, you're obviously learning from one of the best in franchise history. So that's obviously a good sign, too. So the Broncos team captains announced today, one of those team captains being Russell Wilson, to nobody's surprise. The quarterback of the team obviously acquired in the offseason. And really the reason why I think a lot of people are bullish on Denver this year, and we all know quarterback is the most important position in the NFL. But Nathaniel Hackett was also asked today about the importance of having your quarterback being one of your team captains. And here's what he had to say on that front.
Yeah, I think you always want the quarterback to be one of those guys that you're looking to, because they're the ones that really roll with the whole offense and how the team plays. So I'm very glad he was voted the captain, and but in the end it's about who the players believe in, and right now they've got those guys, and I know they believe in a lot of people. It's not just Russell or anybody else.
Coaches speak, but I think well said.
I wouldn't expect anything different. That's what you want out of your players. I think if you as a coach have to try to inspire your players to be ready, then it's gonna be tough. But I think one thing Brandon McManus said stood out to me in a big way when it comes to these captains. I think that Denver has so many players who feel empowered to use their voice. Even guys that weren't elected captains, they're empowered to use their voice. Russell Wilson empowers other players to speak up and to share their experience, their insight with the team. And the biggest test for me is when the Broncos face adversity, when they find themselves in a hole, what's their response going to be? That's something I want to see, and that's something that Brandon McManus alluded to today is, he said for us to be able to see all the change and everything that's been talked about and the carryover and the transformation, he said for us, our biggest challenge is how do we respond when we find ourselves facing some adversity? How do the leaders respond to that? And I think that's a huge, huge thing. I actually just wrote about that. It's up at milehighsports.com right now. It's live on the website, so make sure you check that out. Some insight from the captains and maybe their mindset on this. But I think that was a spot-on thing for McManus to say. That's one thing I'm looking forward to seeing.
It'll be interesting, to see what happens when they do face some adversity this season. And obviously playing in that division, the AFC West, with all that talent, all those teams, they're going to face adversity at some point or another here. They might even face it week one. I'm still very curious to see how Russell Wilson looks going back to Seattle. The only place he's ever played for as a pro. What is that going to look like playing in front of those fans, coming back wearing the opposing team's colors in that sense. So we'll see how that shakes out. But Logan actually brought up a great point to me earlier when we were putting together our show notes. You mentioned how Teddy Bridgewater was kind of the de facto captain by committee, right, last year by playing the quarterback position. Does being a quarterback give you an automatic bid to being a captain? Does it matter that much?
Well, you want your quarterback to be a captain. The quarterback position, because of the demand of it and because of how hyper-focused the spotlight is for a QB, your QB needs to be a captain. I don't know many successful teams that, win a lot of games and their quarterback's not a captain. It's rare. Guys who lead by example. For example, Jay Cutler, when he was a Bronco, wasn't much of a leader in a sense that players in the team wanted him to be, Teddy was gave a lot of good messages to players, and that's something that players have always said about Teddy. There's respect for Teddy, and maybe what he brings to the table as a leader. Well, unfortunately, he's got some limitations in the deep ball passing game, which impacted everything in his offense that Pat Shurmur ran last year. But Teddy was good at motivating guys, giving good messages, and having those things that people think about. You say something and you think about it. Like Von Miller said, we haven't had that since 18, which when you hear that, you're like, that's really tough to say because
right.
When you look at the quarterbacks from 18 to Teddy, there weren't really many guys that could be that leadership guy. I think Case Keenum is probably the best example of a leader that you could have.
Yeah, and that's the thing is just because you're a great leader doesn't always mean you're going to be a great quarterback, and I think we've seen, I'm sure people think of Brett Rippon, as a great football mind. We already know that, potentially a great leader. We see sometimes, Teddy Bridgewater gives me vibes of someone that would be a great offensive coordinator, somebody that would be a great coach as well. Like, I don't know. I think sometimes if you have the football knowledge, it doesn't always work out as a. I mean, I'm not trying to say Teddy Bridgewater is bad, but it's just one of those situations where you can be a great leader and not necessarily fit the part from a playing perspective all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about like Teddy being a coach either, though, to be honest with you. Like, I think being a coach and being a player and being a leader is completely different things. Because when you're a coach and you're a leader, you have an entire room of people that
Right.
are looking to you. When things are going wrong, they're looking to you, right? And that's a lot of pressure, and some people can't rise up to that challenge. I think that's why, I think with this coaching staff, I think they're in a very good spot. With Vic Fangio, it wasn't necessarily like the great leader in a
Right.
sense. It was more so,
You got to be able to look towards someone and have faith, right?
and I don't think they had that last year. Like,
They haven't had
from
it
the
for-
coaching staff, but in the players, like amongst themselves, they did. The players really rallied together. Last
Yeah,
year for each
and
other.
that's what I'm interested to see is, it did feel like there was that universal kind of camaraderie amongst the players. Like, is that now elevated with somebody like Nathaniel Hackett who's going to empower these players, right? Bringing in somebody like a Russell Wilson who is, a leader of men, great at leading people at the quarterback position. Justin Simmons, a year older. Bradley Chubb, a year wiser. These are all themes that we're going to have to keep an eye on here with football season now upon us.